And thank you very much for coming to this briefing. This is not an easy briefing, but it's one that we have to do. Let me start by introducing colleagues who are with me on stage here. On my right is Professor Loretta Feris, who's the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Transformation. And next to her is Doreen February. She's a public participation consultant who's been working with us on the work that we'll be sharing with you today. And on my left is Dr. Victoria Gibbon. He's a biological anthropologist here at UCT and curator of skeletal remains, and you will hear her talk later. And we've got family members on the right. Next to Doreen is Mr. Alfred Stierman, and next to him is Sensa Matas, Mrs. Sensa Matas. In the audience, we also have a member of the community who's here to support the Stierman family, Leonardo Klein. He's somewhere in the audience. And we also have the speaker of the Namaqua Municipality and Traditional Healer, Denise Owes, who's in the audience. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us, not only today, but throughout this journey that we're taking as a university. And thank you to all members of the media for being with us. UCT, like many other universities around the world, has a human skeletal collection that provides long-term safe storage of skeletons used for research. It is not unusual for universities to receive skeletons for teaching and research purposes. Usually, these skeletons come to us as a result of a bequest. People who donate their bodies for educational purposes, or families who do so, or as donations from the state. Sometimes, in our surrounding community, old human skeletal remains are uncovered during development by erosion of the soil. And UCT currently has got 1,021 skeletons. They are used for educational and research purposes in a variety of disciplines, including health sciences. They help us understand how our species has adapted over time and to different environments. The donation of human skeletons, whether they be of cadaver or archaeological origin, has always been tightly controlled at UCT. But deeper consideration of the ethical context of their collection has been a focus since the 1980s, and research is now controlled by strict protocols. However, earlier this year, during an archiving audit of the collection, one of our academics in the Health Sciences Faculty's Division of Clinical Anatomy and Biological Anthropology, and I've introduced you to her, Dr. Victoria Gibbon, discovered that our skeletal collection includes 11 skeletons that were obtained unethically in the 1920s. The very limited documentation for these skeletons indicates that these people died in the 19th century and that at least 9 of them probably were Khoi people who had been captured and forced to work as slaves on a farm near Sutherland in the Northern Cape. Sadly, this was a common practice in South Africa at the time. The skeletons appear to have been removed from the owner of the farm in the 1920s and sent to the university. There is no evidence that UCT staff conducted any research with these skeletons, although we cannot confirm that they remained undisturbed in the collection. As soon as we discovered this documentation, we began investigating how we could return these skeletons to their place of origin so that they could rest near their families. The first step, of course, was to try to locate the descendants of the people. We were able to do so with the help of social development specialist Mrs. Doreen February, who's here with us. And Ms. Doreen February works for the Nosipo Consultancy. Of course, we as a university are currently on a journey of transformation. And so we have decided to go through this process, even though we know that it is impossible to undo the injustices that these men, women, and children received during their lifetime. Our hope is that this process of repatriation will go some way to restore the dignity that was stolen from them, to recognize them as fellow human beings, and to give their descendants the opportunity to remember and honor their ancestors. as deeply distressing as this finding has been to us as an institution, we also realize that it presents us as UCT with an opportunity to revisit a past injustice, to reflect on and learn from our past, and seek ways to amend for past transgressions. UCT has an incredible heritage. We are so proud of those who came before us in the history of this great institution and the many incredible achievements and inheritance they left us. They've given us and the future generations so very, very much to be proud of. We will protect that heritage and build on it. However, we have to walk our own path in further transforming the institution. And in walking that path, we have to acknowledge the past that we don't like as well. While many of our discussions about transformation at UCT tend to focus mainly on the future, where we want our institution to be, we need to have the courage and the honesty to confront our undesirable past and loosen its grasp on us. This finding presents a transformational moment for us as an institution, a moment in which we acknowledge and apologize unreservedly for an institutional mistake and ensure that going forward, we never repeat a mistake of this magnitude, and that we continue to forge an inclusive institution which operates under highest possible ethical codes. While the university cannot erase the almost century-long period from when this incident first happened, we have been fortunate to have the opportunity to extend our heartfelt apologies in person to the descendants and do so again today on this platform. UCT regrets its role in this chapter of history, and we are grateful for the grace and understanding exhibited by the families affected. I wish to thank Professor Feris, our Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Transformation, as well as colleagues in the Office of Inclusivity and Change who have led this project. It is their hard and consistent work that made this important project possible. And I know that they will see it through. And I know how difficult it is emotionally and in so many other ways. They have made this significant and important moment in our institution's history possible. And so I'm going to ask right now Professor Loretta Feris, our Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Transformation, and she will introduce other colleagues that she's been working with, and she will explain how we began the process of repatriation that is currently underway, and what steps are in place to ensure that we honor the memory of these fallen ancestors.
So yes, I want to also repeat that this has in fact been a very difficult journey for us at the university. I think we were all really shocked when we became aware of this last year. And as we started the process of trying to discover how the remains came into the possession of UCT, but also to kind of grapple with what is the process that we need to take on board in terms of doing what needs to be done. And of course, considering this, we had to recognize that when UCT accepted these remains and stored them for almost a century, I think a part of that century knowingly, towards the latter part of the century, not necessarily knowing that it was in its possession, it was nevertheless implicit in the injustice that was done to this community. And so, as the VC has said, whilst we cannot undo the injustice that was done by this community, both by those who brought the skeletal remains to the university and the fact that the university itself was part of that process, we are now in a moment and we have the opportunity to actually work with the community and the community of Sutherland to see that justice is done, to actually not just to those that were removed from their graves, but actually also to the descendants. It was very interesting that when we were there last week, when we talked to the community, there was a sense of there's a part of our history that we were not aware of and that we are now uncovering. And I think that's a very important moment and a very important opportunity for us at UCT. So in terms of trying to conceptualize the way in which we were going to deal with this, it was in fact very difficult, because currently, whilst there's a legal framework that gives us a sense of how we should manage skeletal remains, and whilst the South African Heritage Act deals with the actual reburial processes, there are no guidelines for how do we involve affected communities, and especially where, as in this case, we actually were able to trace the descendants of those skeletal remains. And so knowing that, we sort of have shaped a process up until now, and going forward, we will work with the community itself in order to finalize that process. So we were able to, and Dr. Gibbons will explain that, we were able to trace some of the names of linked to the skeletal remains. And we thus asked Ms. February to start a informal process of trying to trace the descendants. And she went to Sutherland and she worked with the community, and we were able to trace some of the descendants, and some of them are here today. Last week, I went with my team and we started an informal process of simply meeting the descendants, and paying our respects, and like the VC said, apologizing in person to them for the role that UCT played in all of this, and to share the information, to let them know how we came upon the remains, and what processes we are interested in taking forward. So we met with the descendants that we were able to trace thus far. We met with local government leaders. We met with provincial government leaders. We also had a meeting with the local community at large. We met with traditional leaders. We met with the local farmers association. So we had a whole range of stakeholders with whom we met. Like I said, it's very much an informal process at this moment. The South African Heritage Resources Act actually describes a formal process, and that formal process will start next week. And Ms. February will explain that process. But of course, as the VC said, this is not just about a process. This is about restorative justice in a way, which is very much at the heart of transformation when it comes to heritage, when it comes to working with communities. So from my side also, I want to thank the family for the gracious way in which they welcomed us in Sutherland, even though this was very painful. And in moments that I was there, I think we had moments where we sort of had a shared pain in having to deal with this, but there was a certain warmth and graciousness, and we really deeply appreciate the community for that.
My naam is Feris Stuurman. Ek is gebore die 18de Mei 1963 op 'n plaas in die distrik van Sutherland. Die plaas se naam was Driefontein. Ek is die eerstgeborene kind van my ma, en daarom het hulle gevoel dat ek my oupa se naam moes kry. So dis waarom ek Feris Stuurman is. Saam met my vanmiddag hierso is ook my niggie, Sensa Mitas. Nooiens van was Stuurman, maar sy is nou getroud Mitas. So ek is ook baie dankie en bly dat sy vandag kan saam met my hier wees. Dan wil ek ook vir julle verder sê dat soos ons die goeders nagegaan het ek altyd geweet van die bestaan van die Stuurman familie, maar ons kon nooit regtig waar ons vinger daarop lê nie. Maar op die 1 Oktober 2018 het 'n lang droom wat ek gedroom het vir my waar geword. So daarom wil ek vir die Universiteit van Wes-Kaapland sê baie dankie vir dit wat hulle aan ons kom openbaar maak het. Ek wil ook sê dat die geskiedenis van David Stuurman het ek ook redelik nagevors. En ek het ook uitgevind dat David Stuurman familie was van my oupa Grootjie. My oupa Grootjie se naam was Afrika Stuurman. En dat was 'n David Stuurman, Klaas Stuurman, en daar was hopelik nog 'n Jacob Stuurman ook geweest. Maar oor Jacob kan ek nie so baie gesels nie, want ek het nie baie detail van hom nie. Maar ek wil vandag vir die Universiteit van Kaapstad sê baie dankie vir die lang droom wat hulle gekom opmaak het. Ek glo ook so dat die familie in Sutherland ook baie opgewonde is vandag om te weet dat ek hier is om die proses te volg wat nou sal plaasvind hier vanaf. Dat so wil ek ook sê baie dankie.
So as you can understand, we are a university, and part of the work that we do as a university is to use our expertise as scientists to understand our condition. Some of it to understand our history, even this history that we're talking about right now, that's unpleasant. And so Dr. Gibbon will give us an idea of the work that she's doing to help us understand where the skeletons, details of the skeletons. She can probably explain also how she does her work as a biological anthropologist. But that's the social responsiveness of our work. Science coming into society, helping us to understand our undesirable past.
So I'm a biological anthropologist. I think maybe a little background might be helpful on what that is. So anthropology is the study of people, what makes us human. And as a biological anthropologist, I focus on the biological remnants of what make us human. And many people ask me, why do we have human remains at the university? And in South Africa, it's illegal to have human remains in the public sector. Government recognizes only a few legal repositories of human remains. And examples of these kinds of repositories across the country are museums and universities, including the normal places in which the dead are laid to rest. So human remains in the UCT collection are not owned by the university, but they're rather in long-term safe storage. And we rely on the government to help us guide processes of when they can be restituted or when they remain at the university. And so majority of our collection comes from familial or personal donation in terms of cadaveric donation and training medical professionals across the university, from doctors, nurses, physiotherapists, occupational therapists. And human remains, sadly, are uncovered every day in this country. And they're found regularly in society, and they require attention. When human remains are uncovered, it's shocking for everybody. And they can be from all different contexts. They can be from a forensic context. They can also be from a deep history or archaeological context. And the reason they're uncovered is because of erosion. So soil erosion from wind, water, also beaches washing out, a high tide, for example, and also from development. So here in Cape Town, where we have a lot of development happening along our coastlines, remains are recovered from the past. And so when these remains are uncovered, if they're from an archaeological context, we work with South African Heritage Resource Agency in order to guide these processes. And I regularly consult for forensic pathology services and the South African Police Services in helping identify missing and murdered people in our city. And so these remains, we have permission from different levels of government in order to use them in teaching and research purposes, depending on where they're sourced from. And the management of human remains at the university is managed in accordance with the National Health Act of 2003, which is regulated by the Inspectorate of Anatomy in the Western Province, and also the South African Heritage Resource Agency at a national level under the Graves and Burials Grounds Section 36 of the National Heritage Resources Act number 25 of 1999. And locally, we work with Heritage Western Cape, the local branch of SARA. So on a regular basis, I'm requested by different types of government to provide a biological report on human remains that are uncovered. And I can provide information on you looking at skeletal remains about a person, how they lived, and also how they died. I can help reconstruct who the person was, which, as you can imagine, in my forensic work, regularly helps identify missing and murdered local people. In addition to estimating who the person was, how they live, how they die, we can also sometimes secure expertise from outside the university, such as facial reconstruction, stable isotope analysis can be done here on campus, radiographic analysis, and also genetic analysis. And so as curator of the collection, I started at the university in 2016, and I became curator of the collection. And this is just one of my duties. And when I first started, I did a digitization of the collection records. So the collection began in 1913 with the training of medical students and medical doctors at the University of Cape Town. And in February 2017, I attended a national symposium at Aziko Museum on human remains management and repatriation. And it's in this meeting where there was a large discussion with national stakeholders on what is ethical and unethical procurement of human remains. And so returning from this, I came back to the campus and I did an analysis of our collection and our records. And in particular, we don't actually have guidelines from the government of exactly what is ethical or unethical. And so, well, in my mind, this is very clear. I realized I needed to write it down so that it could be clear to everybody. And so ethically procured remains are those that are excavated or rescued under government issue permit. These can be donated by the South African Police Services, Forensic Pathology Services, as we're recognized as a repository of human remains. So on occasion, if remains are not identified in forensic cases, they can stay at the university until such a time, and we hope that time comes. They can also be donated through bequests of an individual or family member as donation to science and learning. This is primarily for cadaveric dissection. And prior to the current permitting agencies, both the National Health Act and SARA, I considered things that are ethical that would be currently ethical for remains to come to the university, such as we would be permitted to remove remains that are rescued from erosional processes, from wind, water, building, and development. So unethically procured remains are those that are obtained under circumstances that are not considered ethical in 2017 or in 2018. Examples include someone from the public going and digging up the remains of somebody who was laid to rest, purposeful removal of an intact burial for the purposes of donation. And these people in these categories or individuals in these categories can be more easily identified for us because they have known names, they come from clear locations, and we have historical documents which suggest that they were removed from their final resting place. And so in this process, what I realized is that we had 11 unethically procured remains. And immediately I contacted my superiors and we put a moratorium on these individuals. And we sealed them and we separated them from the collection, and no one has looked at them since this time. We sought advice from the South African Heritage Resource Agency, which provided very broad guidelines of a formal process of engagement. It took some time for us to figure out a way forward, and we felt the initial process that is legislated is a little bit impersonal. And as such, through advice of other people, we were given the name of Doreen February as a public participation advisor to help us locate the families, the community, and to go into the community and explain the situation and see how we can do this in a more holistic way. And so the real only guidelines we had was we need to make contact and notify the local community, consult on a process, and through Doreen, which she will speak to, we did meet with the families on October 1st. And I will just say that there are 11 unethically procured remains, and the 9 that we are currently focusing on a process of restitution come from Sutherland. 8 of the 9 come from a single farm. They were brought to the university by a great-grandson of the original farm owner who did not live in the time that these people lived. These people lived and worked and died on the farm, and they were laid to rest. And for some reason in the 1920s, he thought it would be a good idea to dig them up and bring them to the university. What can I say about these individuals? Honestly, I have not looked at them yet. We met with the families only a week ago. The families have asked me to look at the remains and provide them with a biological report of each individual. The only records we have are from this individual who donated the remains, and they may or may not be correct. We have 4 male individuals. We have 2 females. It suggests that there are 2 children and 1 individual of unknown sex or age. In terms of cause of death, this is something the family is very interested in knowing more about. There is not a lot of information in the records, but it does suggest that 1 individual has sign of illness. Children regularly would have died in the 18th century at young age of illness, so I would argue that's probably why. 1 individual has tetanus, and then 2 individuals are suggested to have been quite elderly, so probably have passed from age. And 1 individual, the records indicate that they may have been murdered. And so in the next 2 weeks in my lab, we will be unsealing the remains and doing a full biological report to estimate sex, age, and cause of death. And we'll also look for any indicators of how the person lived and died.
Thank you very much, Victoria. We've introduced Doreen. As a university, it's always sensible and responsible, actually, to work with the community when we do this kind of work, and Doreen has been a consultant in that regard.
Before I proceed with what I would want to share with you, I would like to announce the names of the 2 families. The first one is Cornelius Abram. He died in 1878 on the farm Kruisrivier. Then Klaas Stuurman, he died 1879 on the farm Kruisrivier. Sarkie Stuurman died 1818 on the farm Kruisrivier. Then there's 2 children that belongs to Klaas and Sarkie. We do not have their names. It is suggested that they died before 1818. Then we have 3 names with no surnames: Toiki, Yaniki, and Fiki. And then there's 1 unknown skeleton without a name or a surname. I just want us to, because these people, their rights were violated, we're still talking about their souls. We just need to have a minute of silence. Thank you. I think it's important that we do pay our respects to the human remains, because they were illegally removed from their last resting place. If I could start with the public process. This process is based on Section 36 of the South African Heritage Act, which require the UCT community to contact and consult with the community and affected parties. And in this instance, there is 2 families, the Abram family and the Stuurman family, that is affected. Then through the consultation, they have to reach an agreement of the way forward, and we are in that process. Furthermore, this process is also based on the South African Constitution that protects the right of the vulnerable whose rights were violated. in life and in death, if I could add that. Now, I started this process in mid-September, where I went out to Sutherland. Due to the sensitive nature of the process, we decided that it would be sort of an informal introduction to the Sutherland community. So I went out there and I got the support of one of the community members that's here today, Leonardo Klein, which I really would like to congratulate and recognize here today, because he has been our support there in the community and providing us access to the community, helping us to identify the relevant stakeholders and also the affected families. So since then, for 2 weeks, we were busy engaging on a one-to-one basis with community leaders. And then also the week after the first week, we were able then, with the support of community members, to trace some of the affected families. At this stage, the stakeholders comprises of the local community. We've engaged with the local government. We've engaged with NGOs in Sutherland. We've engaged with faith-based organizations. On the 1st of October, the team of UCT was formally introduced to the community, and we had a range of meetings. Firstly, the focus will be from now on the affected families. There was a meeting that was taken place there, and then the leadership of Sutherland was taken into confidence and had a one-on-one with them also. And later in the evening, there was a public meeting that was good, supported by the people of Sutherland. So obviously, in my engagement with the communities, there was, at first, their reaction was one of shock. They were stunned because they didn't know about this happening. Obviously, there was questions raised also. Were the people found in one grave? Was there foul play involved? Why did UCT sit so long on this and only coming out now? So, but on the 1st of October, those questions was posed again to the delegation that was led by Professor Feris, so that the community at large could get answers on those questions, which was answered by them. The way forward that we're going with this process now is in terms of Section 36 of the Heritage Act. There will go out an advert in the next week, a formal advert to invite further comments, and also maybe there would be other Stearman and Abram families that might come forward through the advert and register themselves as affected families. For now, we concentrate on the affected families that stay in Sutherland and surroundings for this project. Then after that, the consultation process will go on. It will be continuously public participation. We would want to have it inclusive as possible. So that's why I'm saying it's an ongoing process that we will lead, but our main focus at this stage will be the affected families, because they were in their engagement on the 1st of October. They did put forward some requests to the university to support them so that they could get more information, as Dr. Gibbon has alluded to, in terms of the biological report and other reports that they need to know the cause of death of the descent of the ancestors. So the process of public participation, consultation will be ongoing until there is an agreement reached between the university and the affected families, because they will inform and actually shape the public participation process. What they want would necessarily be first on the table, because it is about them and they need to be acknowledged in this process. I thank you.
I guess it remains for us to thank you for being with us here. As I explained when we started, it's part of our transformation journey. Transformation, as we always say at UCT, is not just about employment equity. It's about all of these. It's about who we are, what our past are, how we own up to it, and what we become in the process of doing that. So thank you for being here with us and engaging with us. I'm sure we will have another engagement where we update you as to how far we are as time goes on. Thank you very much.